1,100 chapters, 500 million volume sales, a certified household name across the globe, once part of the big three, then leaving its rivals in the dust to compete with the next generation, then outliving even the next generation to continue on as the seemingly everlasting cornerstone of the manga industry, One Piece, the immortal king of Shonen Jump, has dominated the scene for 3 straight decades and counting, with a world and story so vast and ambitious that every other manga seems simplistic in comparison. And yet the tale has managed to maintain its quality across 30 years, even as it has ballooned to unimaginably grand proportions. What makes One Piece unique is that it is the only manga to have ever existed that can be truly considered a modern-day epic, comparable to the likes of the Odyssey, as this scale of storytelling should simply not be feasible with the type of weekly or monthly, short-form, chapter-by-chapter writing that the manga medium demands. And once One Piece finally comes to a close, that's it. There will be no successor. This is the first and last true epic that will ever exist in the medium of manga. You will never again get a manga with a hero's journey of this sweeping scale, with a world and overarching narrative this densely layered, because the specific combination of circumstances that allowed One Piece to remain in publication for so long and slowly build the type of story it has are too unique to ever be replicated. There are essentially 4 major factors that allowed Oda to craft a literal literary epic in a weekly kids magazine. First, a now irreplicable narrative structure. Second, the specific era in which One Piece began. Third, a trademark formula for maintaining quality. And fourth and finally, a freakish trait that Eiichiro Oda himself has that is unlikely any other mangaka ever will. It is these 4 rare factors in combination that allowed One Piece to become the towering story that it did. And it's pretty much impossible for all 4 to ever come together for any manga again, which is why the epic of One Piece will remain one of one. So let me break down from the start why this combination of factors is so rare. But before we get into it, as you can see, I just got out of the shower. And unlike you, I smell good. I'm serious, if you use a loofah or a washcloth to clean yourself in the shower, you need to stop because you smell bad. That's because loofahs and washcloths are actually well-known breeding grounds for bacteria. That's right, not only do they not clean you, they're actually shown to cause more body odor. So if you actually want to clean yourself and smell good, then like me, you should use Manscaped's Body Buffer, the sponsor for this video. The Body Buffer is actually groundbreaking technology. Since it's made of 100% antibacterial silicone, it does not get bacteria filled over time like loofahs and washcloths. Instead, it genuinely exfoliates you and cleans you by removing dead skin cells and clogged pores, while staying clean itself. So legitimately, I use this, and when I step out of the shower, I feel great. It's like night and day. Like my whole body just feels refreshed and clean, and I know I smell great. And the Body Buffer is part of the Buff bundle, so with it, you'll also get 2 bottles of refined body wash, infused with aloe vera and sea salt to keep your skin feeling clean. So if you want to smell good, if you want to stop using nasty-ass washcloths and loofahs, I've got a great deal for you to try out the Body Buffer bundle for 20% off and free international shipping. You can even get a bundle for your dad for Father's Day. Just go to manscaped.com and get 20% off and free international shipping when you use code MORGE at checkout. That's 20% off plus free international shipping when you use code MORGE at manscaped.com, link in the description below. So that aside, to begin with, I'm sure you've heard One Piece was part of what was called the Big Three in the West, alongside Naruto and Bleach. And what's interesting is that in the generations of shonen series that have followed the Big Three, these new generations tend to be far more strongly influenced by Naruto and Bleach rather than by One Piece, despite the fact that One Piece was far more successful than either of its competitors. For instance, the main character trio dynamic that was popularized by Naruto is a common staple of shonen series today. You can see similar dynamics between Yuji, Megumi, and Nobara, or Denji, Aiki, and Power, or Shinra, Arthur, and Tamaki, so on and so forth. And while I'm definitely not saying that these series are ripping off Naruto, it's clear to see common influences, which is just natural in writing. I mean, One Piece and Naruto themselves were both influenced by Dragon Ball. There's no shame in acknowledging influences. Along those lines, a similar influence is that much like Naruto's ninja schools, you will see superhero academies, or Fire Force training academies, and so on. The idea of young protagonists being trained from a young age to then join up as part of squads or organizations that fight evil is very clearly Naruto-inspired. And along those lines, Bleach has a particularly clear influence in that the Gotai 13, the staple organization of Bleach composed of squads led by captains and lieutenants, seems to have been a sharp point of inspiration for many newer manga. For instance, the Magic Knights of Black Clover are remarkably similar in construction, with even some character archetypes of the captains being clearly identical to Bleach. Same with the numbered company squads of Fire Force, and even Demon Slayer's Hashira also seem remarkably similar in concept to Bleach's captains. Even some series like Undead Unluck that don't copy the squad structure of Bleach do imitate some of Bleach's major plot twists and scenes down to a T. So whereas you can see Naruto and Bleach's fingerprints all over the newer generation of manga, why is that not the case with One Piece? Well, it's because these newer generation of manga do actually aim to imitate One Piece in one specific aspect that is hard to see on the surface, but that in turn, by consequence, requires them to rely a lot on the previous standards set by Naruto and Bleach. What do I mean by that? Well, the number one difference any reader can immediately observe when reading One Piece versus reading its contemporaries in the Big Three is that One Piece excelled in terms of planning and vision. I'm not going to harp too much on this. There's a reason that Oda is praised first and foremost for his unparalleled foreshadowing, and so much of the story is clearly thought out far, far in advance. Even just the physical structure of the One Piece world from the beginning is hard evidence of how far ahead the author had the endgame planned. Whereas, on the other hand, Naruto's mangaka literally didn't even have the character Sasuke planned when he started the story, despite the fact that the entire series basically turned into Naruto's quest to get back Sasuke. And Bleach is even poorer in this regard. Without spoiling anything, let's just say that while the 1,000-Year Blood War in the anime is doing wonders for rewriting that arc, there's a reason that when this arc was originally coming out in the manga, Bleach became synonymous with the term asspull. While Naruto and Bleach are certainly better than One Piece in some aspects, long-term story planning is certainly not one of them. However, the newer generation of shonen is much more like One Piece in this regard. Looking at series like Chainsaw Man, Jujutsu Kaisen, My Hero, Black Clover, Fire Force, Undead Unluck, and so on, all of these series are very, very clearly planned out far in advance, to the point that very early on in their stories you can clearly see long-running plot threads connecting and coherently building towards an intended conclusion of the story. Whether or not readers like the ending of, say, Jujutsu Kaisen or My Hero Academia, it is at the very least clear that their mangakas were building towards these specific endings for a long time. In this regard, the overarching narratives of new-gen manga are much more methodically plotted out, similar to One Piece. However, here's where it gets interesting, because at the same time, it's extraordinarily difficult to plot out a story on the scale of One Piece, because One Piece's narrative is just ridiculously, absurdly large. It's not just the actual length of chapters. The complexity of the world and the number of plot lines being woven together is absolutely insane. One Piece features a main cast of characters who set off into a vast, open, seemingly endless sea, where it takes hundreds of chapters for us to even begin to understand a bit of how the world works. Then hundreds more chapters for us to begin to understand the broader conflict, and nearly 1,000 chapters for us to truly understand the full context of said conflict. All of it is clearly signposted and built up and foreshadowed beforehand, so it never feels as though Oda is making it up as he goes along, rather that he is simply unveiling the truth of it all bit by bit. But the sheer scale of the actual bigger picture is so jaw-dropping that it makes it a daunting degree of planning for a newer generation mangaka to replicate. It makes sense, as Oda has often expressed that he has been planning this very same story from literally his childhood, whereas that's not really the case for most any other mangaka. In fact, many of them have other works that they write before getting to the one that hits and takes off for them. So for newer generation mangaka who want to replicate One Piece's planned out story structure, but can't reasonably replicate the same level of ridiculous scale of narrative planning and world building from day one, it therefore becomes easier to default to tighter settings for their story. That's why instead of a giant cast of main characters like One Piece, focus on a trio like Naruto. And instead of a vast, never-ending open world for the heroes to traverse, work with a more focused focal point, such as schools and academies that ground the story, or squads and crime-fighting organizations that protect the nation or the city. In this regard, it's a mix of both worlds. Many newer generation mangas are taking a page out of One Piece's book in terms of prioritizing planning out their plot and worlds better from the start, but they are not trying to imitate One Piece's plot and setting in itself, as it is simply too large and ambitious to attempt. They are instead opting for tighter settings that are often Naruto and Bleach inspired, where the narrative and world can be more easily planned out from the beginning. This is definitely good for manga storytelling overall, as planning out the story from the beginning is strictly better writing. But it also means that just reading any newer generation manga, you can tell from pretty early on that it's not going to turn into some giant sprawling epic like One Piece, as they are all aiming for more tight narratives from the beginning. In fact, I'd say that for most newer generation manga, you can sort of see the endpoint that we are vaguely heading towards by chapter 100, as compared to One Piece, where by chapter 100 we had only just finished the prologue and the actual quote-unquote legend was only just now finally beginning. And this brings us to the major point number 2, which is that part of the reason you'll never see a series as ambitious as One Piece again is that it was simply allowed to take its time, which is not the case with manga today. Think about what I just explained, that chapter 100 in One Piece is where the real story of One Piece actually finally begins. Before that, we were literally just wandering around East Blue with no real overarching plot, fighting random villains of the week for 100 chapters straight. We literally didn't know anything about any sort of broader conflict or direction of the story, other than the goal was to go to the Grand Line and look for a treasure. The only semblance of structure to the story is that we heard that there's something called the Three Great Powers out there, and that the Shichibuka are one of them, and we'd only even briefly met one of the Shichibuka at that point. Think about how absurdly slow of a start that would be for a modern series today. I mean, Chainsaw Man wrapped up one of the most high-octane roller coaster storylines ever put to paper in its first 100 chapters. Jujutsu Kaisen set up its final conflict in its first couple chapters. My Hero gets its world and stakes generally established in the first dozen or so chapters. Undead Unluck is already hitting you with its mind-blowing hook within the first 20 chapters, so on and so forth. Everything today is just fast, fast, fast. Get attention fast. What's the broader conflict? What's so exciting about this story's premise? How much hype can the manga build up right away? What plot twists can it hit readers with? What cool characters can capture an audience? So on and so forth. I mean, One Piece's first 20 chapters concluded with Luffy fighting Buggy as its most exciting event. It took literally 50 chapters for any character of note to show up. A series going at that lackadaisical of a pace wouldn't last a full year today, and may honestly be made fun of by readers online who don't realize how good the writing will slowly become. But that's the thing. One Piece's greatest strength is its slow pace. While most series today go fast, 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 the reason that One Piece became an epic is that it takes its time to build and build and build. The longer you take to get to the meat of the conflict, and the more time you are giving to allow the reader to gradually soak in the world, the more the reader will feel the weight of the stakes that are being built up. A war that was set up in 100 chapters carries a small fraction of the weight that a war that was set up for 1,000 chapters has, because the narrative has been allowed to develop its stakes, its factions, the context, the lore, and so on. One Piece became an epic because it started small and simple and built to grand and complex. You can only get to something grand and complex if you have the freedom to take your time without raising the stakes too rapidly right off the bat. It's similar to how a classical symphony may begin with a simple lilting melody at first that slowly adds more movements and harmonies before finally rising into a great crescendo, whereas most manga today have to function like songs on the radio that have to have a catchy verse and chorus right off the bat so that they can stick fast. Don't get me wrong, you can still make phenomenal music either way. I'm just saying that One Piece is probably the last classical symphony that we're going to get, because what the genre is allowed to be has shifted. And along those lines, there's another old school aspect to One Piece's storytelling that is arguably a little antiquated and may not fly for newer series today, but it does work in the context of One Piece and is the key that allows it to run for so long without really dropping in quality. After all, you can't really craft a giant 1,000+ chapter epic if the series falls off in quality at some point. But consistent quality over such a huge stretch of time is extremely difficult to hit with most story structures. It only works for One Piece's story structure because of the One Piece formula. See, the broader story of One Piece is built through the smaller arc-by-arc storylines of each island, and every island does follow a similar narrative structure. We get to a new island, we meet lots of side characters, some of them have sad backstories, there's some evil oppressor or invading force that needs to be beaten, Luffy and the Straw Hats defeat them and save the day and move on. And most every island arc is some variation of this storyline. That's not necessarily a bad thing, since to begin with, it is a really great formula that's designed to emotionally move us pretty much every time. And on top of that, Oda is such a creative genius that just because he's using the same template doesn't change the fact that he's able to fill that template with wildly fresh content nearly every time. So we still never know exactly what we're going to get. If anything, it's a huge testament to Oda as a writer that One Piece is known for having such a consistent template, and yet the series is also known for being wildly unpredictable with crazy plot twists. So with regards to how One Piece has been able to run for so long, a huge part of it is that the quality remains relatively consistent, with some dips and rises here or there, but it never actually falls off. And that's mainly because there's a consistent formula for each arc that Oda knows works, that he's able to use as a foundation again and again. The key to why One Piece is able to get away with using the same formula is actually because One Piece is all islands. Since each arc is a new island, we're always entering into a new setting and essentially starting fresh. As such, it feels more okay in a sense to play out familiar narrative beats, since we're still resetting everything else. The location, the characters, the conflict, the context are all new. Whereas with other series that have tied themselves into a tighter setting, that aren't constantly hitting giant resets but are simply continuing on the plot from the previous arc, you expect the narrative to be more distinct arc to arc. As such, there is less leniency for repetition for these series, but repetition is also what allows for consistency, which is why it's so crucial that One Piece's world structure has essentially set itself up for allowing some degree of repetition without its readers getting bored, which in turn allows for sustained consistency over an insane stretch of time. But even that's not the biggest reason why One Piece has remained so good for 1100 chapters. No, the biggest reason for that, and the most significant, unique aspect of One Piece's success that I can't imagine any other mangaka replicating, is the insane creative energy of Eiichiro Oda himself. Note, I'm not saying that no other mangaka is as good or creative as Oda. The quality of writings and ideas between mangaka and who is the best is totally up for debate. What I'm referring to here specifically is the manic, obsessive energy to keep creating that Oda has that you don't really see in the same way in anyone else. Publishing in Weekly Shonen Jump or even in monthly publications is ridiculously draining, having to constantly draw while simultaneously writing dialogue, planning the long-term plot, and also handling the business side of things week after week, month after month, year after year, takes an absurd toll on mangaka. It can be physical, with many of the all-time greats suffering from health issues. Even Oda suffers from this as well. And it can also be mental, with many mangaka simply experiencing burnout and looking forward to the series ending. But even though Oda does take frequent breaks for his health, his overall energy for continually producing One Piece is incessant. The man does not sleep. He'll exclusively take 3-hour naps for weeks on end. He doesn't allow his assistants to draw anything besides backgrounds. He stacks up volumes on volumes of notes for the future of the story. But despite the draining demand of writing One Piece, not once do you ever get the sense that Oda is burnt out writing it. Not once do you get the sense that he's trying to cut corners and bring the story to an early stop. The man has been doing this for 25 years, and he initially only planned to do it for 5. And even now, when it feels like we're in the quote-unquote home stretch, it still seems to just extend on and on, with just the first arc of the final saga already becoming one of the longest in the series. Oda is not rushing. He seemingly can't stop himself from wanting to put down to paper everything that he can think of. Even if it makes the story longer and longer, he keeps throwing in more side characters, more plot lines, just more. Did you know that initially there were just supposed to be 4 scabbards, but Oda couldn't help himself and kept on coming up with more till there were 9? Did you know that Oda's editors regularly have to reel him in from writing more arcs? That Punk Hazard was supposed to be 2 arcs, a Fire Island and an Ice Island arc, and Oda was told to combine them. That Dressrosa and Greenbit were supposed to be separate arcs. This man simply can't help himself. Nearly 3 decades of writing, and he just has this obsessive need to keep creating. His brain is just overflowing with ideas. That is the type of craziness that it takes to end up writing a story as ludicrously huge as One Piece. It's not just about being a brilliant writer. You also need to literally never get tired of writing the same story, with the same hero, chasing the same end vision that was planned from when you were a kid. And at the same time, you need to never run out of fresh ideas along the way. There may be mangaka down the line who are quote-unquote better writers than Oda. Hell, you could argue that there are other mangaka today who are better than Oda, depending on what you value. But it's not just about quality of writing. There is a certain level of insanity that Oda possesses that makes him uniquely suited to writing something of such absurd length and never running out of steam. And it's that combination of being a phenomenal writer while also having that limitless supply of energy, that combination is something we will likely never see again. So all that is to say, treasure One Piece while you can, because this is it. If you love long-form grand fantasy stories, if you crave this type of sheer epic scale, then enjoy the One Piece ride while you're on it, because it's not happening again. Not in a weekly or monthly manga publication. It's simply not feasible. This type of world and narrative structure, from an era that allowed for a more slow and gradual plot development, with a unique formula that guarantees a consistent level of writing across 30 years, and a mangaka that has a somehow endless reserve of creative passion to keep pushing and pushing to grow a story past the bounds of what should be possible in the medium, to genuinely turn a children's comic into a legitimate modern-day epic by every definition of the word. This combination of factors is simply lightning in a bottle. Unfortunately, there can never again be a manga like One Piece. But the good news is that means we're all getting to enjoy in real time a phenomenon that will never again happen in history. So let me know if you think it's possible for an epic like One Piece to ever be written in manga again in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this video, then definitely like and subscribe.